Hello and welcome to Albinism Life. My name is Christina Venning-Rose. In this episode, we're going to be talking to the lovely Jess. She is in year 13 and studying for her A-levels, wanting to become a solicitor. It really struck me having this conversation that yes, academically and educationally, things have changed in terms of provisions for kids who have albinism, who are visually impaired. But socially and emotionally, I think we're still where we were when I was at school, and it really struck a chord. I thought things had changed in terms of how kids accept you if you are different. But we kind of chat about this. It's not a negative episode. It's just as I wanted it to be in this podcast. You know, albinism isn't sugar-coated. We're honest. We're talking about the highs and we're talking about the lows. So Jess chats through her time at primary school and how she was absolutely fine academically but really struggled socially, and the same as in secondary, but explained why and thought that maybe COVID had a bearing on this. We also chat about what it's like to have a younger sibling with albinism and the responsibility that brings with it, and we talked about social media and what the impact of dyeing your hair could have on your identity. So please take a listen and join me at the end where you can find out how to get in touch. So I just started off by asking Jess to tell me a little bit about herself.
Well, I'm 17, my birthday's in July, and I'm in my last year of studying my A-levels. I'm doing music, art and law, and I'm hoping to become a solicitor in the future.
Have you always wanted to study law? Is there anything that triggered you off? Why do you want to study law?
I think the reason I want to study law is because I have a very strong sense of justice. I feel it quite a lot, like being someone with a visual impairment, being someone who's visually distinctive. I find it's quite important. It's very important to me to kind of fight for what I believe in and fight for, other people, fight for the things which I know I deserve,
So do you think some of the experiences that you have had as somebody who has albinism has led you to want to make that career choice?
I think, yes, it's been quite a major factor. I think that, growing up in kind of an environment where you'd sometimes have to ask for a little bit more, and sometimes I have to explain to people what needs to change and what the new standard needs to be for me to learn the best and for me to have the best time, and especially because I have a younger sister, for what she might need in the future. I really think it's important that law kind of comes to me. I'm happy to speak to people to make the changes.
So let's rewind. Let's go back in time. Okay. Right from the very start. So your mum and dad are very proactive in the albinism community. You've been brought up in this community. Do you remember the first time when you kind of realised that you were different to other people?
I'd say probably around 4 or 5, I think, was the kind of like awakening, I guess, for me. I was just starting school and it was quite a positive experience, to be honest, kind of realizing I was different. I saw it as a strength. I think it was another child asked, could they come to my drawer to watch me change my glasses, to see what I do with my shades and my glasses, because I have 2 different pairs instead of transitions, which I had a year ago. But at the time I thought, you know what, this is really cool. They think I'm really cool, but also none of them do this. So is that a bad thing? Well, I don't actually think so, because people seem to find it interesting if they want to come and see me getting my shades out to go to break. So for me, it was a positive kind of experience to kind of realize that I was different at that age.
And do you think it's because your parents were very open with you as you were, from day one? Like I've known your parents and you when you were a tiny baby. So do you think that the reason that you feel confident and that those first experiences you had were positive was because you were very comfortable with who you were?
My parents definitely had a massive impact on my confidence in my identity, especially from quite a young age as well. Like, quite often, being the first person born in my family to have albinism, to have low vision, to be visually distinctive, I was very used to kind of explaining to, adults the genetics of why I have an albinism and my parents don't. And I think that really, really set me up in life from quite a very, very young age of having the support around me, having the knowledge from my parents to build like a confidence in myself.
And do you think that's important? So if you were talk to other parents, would you say that it's a really important thing for them to do from when their children are young?
Yeah, I'd definitely I'd say knowledge is power, in my opinion, as opposed to ignorance is bliss. But for me, I think it's really important to have that self-awareness, just to have that kind of acceptance and learning to love all parts of yourself, that especially young people with albinism see it as kind of more of a strength and see it as more of, sure, there are some things which will set us aside from the crowd. There are some people who are going to be awful, but at the end of the day, you've got something unique, you've got something different. And I've had so many positive things happen to me because of my albinism. The whole community at the Albinism Fellowship, I never would have gotten the opportunity to be a part of that if I hadn't really accepted that this is a big part of me and this is, a lovely part of me.
What other positives?
I think in terms of school things, I'm very much obviously remembered by teachers for the good things. So it's not necessarily good if I do a bad thing, but I don't do bad things at school. So that's a good thing. That being easily recognizable is so much like, it's such a strength. Sticking out from a crowd is such a strength when you want to make a positive impression, because I don't think I've ever had to remind a teacher of my name before. And I have friends who don't have albinism who've gone to their parents' evening and teachers have just not known who they are.
Do you think it's part of your identity?
I'd say yes, but it's just a small part of my identity. I don't like to be just remembered as a person who had albinism. I like to be remembered as a person who had albinism, who also was really good at singing, or who also was really smart, or really nice, or really confident.
So back to your earlier days at school. So would you say that most of your experiences, say at primary school, were positive for you?
I wouldn't say most, but I think if you're looking at it as an education perspective, I'd say yes, definitely. I was very, very fortunate to go to a school which was very good at supporting my low vision, very good at supporting the kind of access arrangements that I needed. I had all the gadgets and everything. But I'd say socially, I was really challenged in primary school. I never really was one of the people who had like a friend group going all the way through, or even just consistent friends in primary school. I blame most of that on ignorance and I guess just social groups in general in primary school. Don't really I think I'm not like a friendship group person, to be honest, at this point. Like, I've never really been part of that group or any kind of like gathering of people who stick together for months and years on end. But I think academically, I was very, very lucky to have very supportive schools, but also the people in the schools I've found quite a lot of people aren't necessarily open to people who are different, people who are unique. They tend to just flock together. And there's quite a culture, especially in my school, of, that's so embarrassing or that's cringe. And instead of like being celebrated for having confidence and having solidarity in my identity, it's more of something which people don't really want to associate themselves with. It's kind of like a shying away from the difference. No.
Do you think that some of it was about their awkwardness, about challenging themselves to look outside the parameters of what's normal and hang out with somebody that's a bit different, that isn't going to tick all the boxes of what makes you allegedly cool or not?
I think there's definitely been a social pressure I've noticed it more in secondary school, I think, than primary school, but there's kind of defined cool group and not cool group at our school. But for me personally, I kind of gravitated towards the quote unquote not cool people, just because that's where I thought that I would be accepted. And then they also seem to feel like, there are certain things which they don't accept it into their group.
Do you feel like you have kind of been judged on a surface level by people that don't really know you? They've just made assumptions because you don't look the same, that you're not going to be the same as them?
I do. I do feel in the past, yes. It's kind of better now in sixth form because everyone's doing the subjects which they have chosen. But I find quite a lot that people assume that I'm not very smart, which is really weird, and I don't know where that comes from, to be honest. I find quite a lot of people are very patronizing, and they do tend to dull it down to talk to me, which really does, used to really get to me, and now I'm kind of just, okay, you're lost. But I find it's quite interesting that people who, I'll use an example to kind of articulate what I'm trying to explain. That in one of my classes, there are two boys who sit next to me, well, one seat between, and every time I've spoken to them, it's kind of like they speak to me in a very different way than they speak to each other. Beforehand, I've seen them talk to the people behind us who they don't seem to be in a group with in a completely different manner than they speak to me. Like, it's almost as if they're kind of talking to someone who's not a child, but someone who they know is not as intelligent as them or not as clued in as them.
Yeah. And how does that make you feel?
Not good, but I'm at a point now where it used to really get to me. Like, I used to really think, well, if everyone's going to see me as not as smart as I know I am and they know I am, what's the point in even being that way? Like, why don't I just, the expectations are already low for me, so I shouldn't have to try anymore. But obviously I've abandoned that mindset. At this point, like, I think I just expect it from people, which really shouldn't be a thing. And instead of like working really, really, really hard and exhausting myself to try and prove a point, I tend to just get on with my own thing.
Has this kind of trend throughout school, has it kind of had an impact on your mental health, on your kind of self-esteem?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think the worst year for me was my GCSE year, and I was moved to another class. I think I went down, but I did go back up a little bit before. But I was moved down a set, and I knew some of the people in the set, and I wasn't really friends with anyone. And right off the bat, like, I could tell, these people are not welcoming me. They're not. No one. I sat next to someone who I was kind of acquainted with, and she didn't speak to me at all. And I was already like, even on the first lesson, I was kind of in that culture of, I'm new, I'm different. They'll warm up. But throughout that year, I was treated as a pet. It was just really weird. It was really odd. They did quite a lot of dehumanizing things, like really quite humiliating things. There was one incident where the whole class was just whispering the entire way through a lesson, and then at the end of the class, someone came up, well, one of the like quote unquote cool people, boys, came up to me and offered me a fist bump. And I was like, this is so weird. Why is the whole class watching some random boy who I've never spoken to before come up and offer me a fist bump? Why is this a thing? But it's almost as if they just assume that I do something odd, that I do something different, that I do something which aligned with their perception, that I was a completely different kind of person who had a completely different brain and a completely different reaction. Because I always put my hand up in lessons to answer questions because I knew the answer, they made a thing of that as well. Even though there were so many other people in that class who were, ready to learn, ready to partake in class activity, suddenly it was weird when I did it. When I didn't, like, I think it really took a toll on me at that point, because I would dread the lesson, and I had this lesson every single day. And it was like, I'd go into the lesson, I'd just prepare for someone to say something to me or do some kind of demonstration where I was involved, just to see how I'd react, because to them, I was just a completely different thing. There was another incident where I got up from my seat to go and help someone fix an iPad. Like, fix an iPad, I am helping you. And he just kind of sat there and talked at me and just said the most random thing. He was trying to be encouraging, but in a way you'd encourage a 5-year-old. Like, well done, you're doing really well. It's okay if you can't handle it. It's okay if you can't figure it out. You're doing this for the reaction of the people on your table, to try and enforce that I'm completely different. And it's like, even on the table which I sat at, they wouldn't include me in the group discussion. And if I said anything, they just kind of moved the topic away, as if my point just didn't even exist anyway. And it just felt really horrible. Like, the entire class was just against me. But to them, I was just some kind of exhibit. Horrible, when all I wanted to do was just get my GCSE.
I know you're still at school, but you're in sixth form. When you were younger, did they ever call you any names?
I think name calling wasn't really a thing for me. It was more people doing impressions of me. It was horrible.
Oh,
People used to do impressions. I used to say, oh, I use people's voices to recognize who it is when I can't see people's face. Sometimes, like when my parents and my sister come up the stairs at different, it sounds different when different people come up the stairs. And that's
yeah.
how I know who it is. And it was also in my GCSE year. So these are like 15, 16-year-olds. Bear in mind. And they were at the back of the class stomping around. Do you know who it is? Do you know who it is? And then I also had like someone look at their friend and say, yeah, I have purple eyes, guys, they're changing in color of my mood, I'm just like Jess. And I was like oh, what else? Just people like squinting at me, and I was like, what's even the point of this? Like, what
When I was at school, they used to do impressions of me, like reading things. Did they ever do that with
people, yeah,
you?
who did that with me?
Get a bit of paper
And
and
just
put it right up to their face. And then there's also did they do the how many fingers are you holding up thing?
that one. And they take like gradual steps back and say, can you still see me? Can you still see me?
And you're just like, oh god. And then usually they're just sticking up two fingers or one finger up at you anyway. It was usually they were sticking two fingers up at me, and I was like,
mm,
yeah, and I don't have to see that. I can know that that's what you're doing.
mm. It's
It's so
insane.
crazy that stuff that you were having at school went on when I was at school, and you might have thought that things would have changed. So your sister Becky, she also has albinism. She's a few years younger than you.
She
Do
does.
you think that that's helped you in how you perceive yourself and how albinism is for you? Because I have two sisters, an older sister and a younger sister, and they don't have albinism. So I grew up being the only one in my town, being the only one that anyone had ever seen with albinism. And that's really hard when you are the only person. Do you think that that makes a difference?
I think it does, but equally, I'm the oldest, so I did all of the things. I set the expectation that we need bigger work, we need to be closer to the board, and all of that before she came into school. But it affects me in a way that I think to myself, if I don't fight for this now, then Becky's going to have to fight for it if she needs it in a couple of years when she's in the same position. So it kind of makes me think differently about the battles I pick with school, the battles I pick with socially, because like the littlest thing that I do now can affect her in years to come. She's told me that people refer to her as Jess's younger sister and stuff like that, just because that is what I've laid down the foundation for. But now her friends call me Becca's older sister, as it like an it's funny, it's like an act of like resistance. I think having Becky is quite useful because at least it's someone I can relate to, and especially as she's got older in school, we've had very very different experiences of school socially,
That's really
academically.
interesting.
Mm.
Do you think socially that is literally down to your personalities or the luck of who's in your year?
It's also, I'd say, luck of who's in our year. Also, we have very different approaches, different personalities, just leave it at that. But she's always kind of had a best friend. She's always been in a group.
And do you feel a bit like you have a responsibility, like you were saying earlier on, because you're the first one and you're leading, you're kind of paving the way? How does that make you feel?
I feel like I do have a responsibility, but I also have to make sure I remember that Becky's also quite ready to fight for something if she needs something different. So I think it makes me feel proud that I'm able to support my sister and proud that I have the confidence and that I've stayed true to myself, to have the confidence to fight for these things. But I know that there's still quite a lot of pressure. So I have to remember to be kind to myself and say, it doesn't matter if I get it wrong or if Becky actually wanted something different. Or there's another little boy in our school who's in between the two of us, and he's got very, very low vision, who I know, is also probably influenced by my decisions as I've come through school. You know, teachers make assumptions, and if I want size 18 font, they're going to offer the boy who's younger than me. is size 18 okay for you? Like the old sheets that I used to use, and then Becky's going to get them. Is size 18 okay for you?
Are your needs roughly the same? Is your Becky's and your vision the same, or have your needs differed throughout school as well?
Becky's vision on paper is slightly better than mine, but in real life you probably wouldn't tell, although she would beg to differ. But I think I think the biggest difference between us is probably social. I've kind of set an expectation that I always want to be on the front row, just purely because it's easier for me to lift up my iPad, take a picture, and I'm at a point where I don't really care where I sit in the classroom as long as I'm on the front row, because I don't really have the friends in school to sit with who would want to sit on a different row. But I know that she is different from me because she does have a group of friends which she would want to sit by who probably don't want to sit on the front row. So it's kind of like she always gets put on the front row and she has to kind of speak to the teachers to redefine the standard for her, especially teachers that I've had in the past, that she doesn't need to be on the front row. I just liked to be on the front row, so I kind of set that expectation. Yeah, that's probably the biggest one that comes to mind.
It's really interesting you say sitting on the front row, how times have changed, because when I was at school, I was always made to sit on the front row. And I was like, I tried to tell teachers that there's no point because I
Yeah,
can't see the board if I'm on the front row or if I'm wherever I am. So let me sit wherever I like. However,
exactly.
you're sort of saying it though as well, that you can use your iPads to take a picture
Yeah,
easier on the front row, which I understand now. But when I was a kid, iPads weren't even obviously a thing. So it's crazy that things have changed like that.
yeah,
But equally, it's like you're saying that you can't see it from the front row, sitting on the front row either. And teachers are obsessed. They were, when I was at school, they're obsessed with it. As soon, like at the start of each new year, Christina, you have to sit at the front, and I'm like,
I wish they wouldn't
why?
though. I really wish they wouldn't. I wish they'd ask, because it's
Yeah,
so many times. I personally, I don't need massive A3 sheets. Like they're an absolute pain to carry around. They don't fit in my
yeah.
book.
It's like
They're so
wallpaper.
annoying. I would rather you
Yeah.
just either email me the document so I can zoom in on it myself, or take the time to do it in A4 but just enlarge the text. So then at least I can like have it in my book without taking up the entire space of my bag. And one simple question would have just done that. I think that's the biggest thing that needs to be pushed to schools and by schools. Just don't make assumptions about people. I could have had such a better school experience if people wouldn't have just made assumptions. Yeah, talking about it's kind of made me realize, but yeah.
It's I mean, when you're talking about teachers and making assumptions as well, it's like why don't, and I obviously I get this as an adult. Like I know my vision, know what I can see, and I know what I can't see.
Exactly.
So
Ask
I
you.
don't need somebody to tell me, ask me, rather than make all these assumptions, because it's absolutely bonkers. I'm more than happy to tell you if I can't see something.
Literally.
I mean, sometimes I might not. I might hide it and pretend I can. But for the most part, if the situation is right, I'll say I'm really sorry I can't see that. Don't
Yeah,
assume weird stuff about me. I hate it. It's
literally.
horrible, isn't it?
It's really horrible because then it makes you feel like you need to fit an expectation. I've spoken about my experiences and some of the bad experiences. If people just hadn't assumed that I was not as smart as them, or I wasn't as valid a member of the class as them, then I would have had such a better time. If people could just get on with their own thing and just let me make my reputation for myself rather than just making it all for me. Not worth being treated like a normal person because I'm not a normal person, and that I don't deserve to be treated like a normal person. And that's what made me so upset. But
Mm.
it's because of their assumption and what they did with their assumption that I had such an awful time, because
Have you had to work hard at rectifying that situation, like in your mind, like actually going, knowing I am worthy and I am as good as everybody else? Has that taken work on your part to get to that point?
yeah, that took quite a lot of time. A hell of a lot of time. And I kind of got to a point, I think, just before my GCSEs where I was like, you know what, there's no point anymore. I didn't go to many of those lessons. I did my work in our student room where some of the teaching assistants are there. I did most of my work in there for the last 3 months because I could not face going to that lesson. I was tired of trying to prove that I was a member of that class. I kind of gave up trying to rectify it, and I found peace in the fact that, you know, I'm affirmed by what I believe to be me, not by what they're telling me is me. And I hold that very close to me as someone who's older as well, that, you know, I am what I say I am. And if you think something different, you don't know me because you're not me. So you're wrong.
Yeah. It goes back to assumptions again.
Mm.
Did you end up having to spend a lot of time by yourself when you were lower down at secondary school? Like, did you, because you just gave up on other people, did you just spend time, was it easier to hang out with yourself than try and be with people that didn't accept
Yeah,
you?
definitely. I think I had two standout phases. I had one where I would literally just shove myself onto the end of a table and I'd sit there in silence, I'd eat my food and no one would talk to me. And sometimes I wouldn't even get a seat, so I'd have to just like crouch on the floor next to the
Oh,
table.
it's so
It was
horrible.
horrible. And like, you know, they'd never give up a seat for me on that table, but they'd give up a
Mm.
seat for this person, they'd give up a seat for this person. They'd all There was one time where I was on the edge of the table and another of their friends came along and they were like, "Oh, Jess, do you mind just like moving to that table so that this person can sit?" And that was the only interaction I'd had with them the entire week. And I ended up just saying, you know, at that point, I may as well just go and sit and have my lunch on my own because I can't be in this group. I'd rather be by myself than be with groups which don't appreciate me. So I ended up just spending time by myself. I do that now, but I kind of like it now. Like
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
it now.
no, I get
And
that.
I think that's more because I don't have to be in school for the entire day as well. And I prefer to just sit in my freeze and revise by myself because I don't really work well revising in a group because I get distracted. But especially in lessons, I think, you know, I'm at a point now where you know, I'll go to my lessons, but I'll go to my lessons to learn. I won't go to my lessons to talk to that one person next to me, which is kind of what I had to do in lower school because otherwise I just wouldn't talk to anyone all day. And that made me feel worse because I know that the person next to me didn't want to talk to me, but I needed to talk to people because otherwise I'd feel awful.
Yeah, of course. And it's really hard as well because you can't just walk around and try and look for people who might
No.
talk to you either
Mm,
because you can't see them, can you? So it's
exactly.
like you just have to put up with your situation because there is no there is no other way around it. Like if people aren't going to interact with you, it's really hard for you to find the people who you think might interact with you because you physically can't do it, can you?
Yeah, I mean,
On the question too, Jess, so don't worry about. Um, let's talk about well, I don't know if you might be different to me. Did you, because we're all different, and again, that's something that people just assume that everybody with albinism is the same and we all have the same experiences, and we really, you and your sister are a prime example that that
mm,
absolutely is not the case.
yeah.
Did you ever have a point where you were a bit in denial about having a visual impairment, like you didn't really want to accept any help or you didn't want to do things that made it more obvious? Because people are always going to, because you, albinism is albinism, yeah, you can hide it by dyeing your hair, but other than that, you know, you're obvious to people what you are. But your visual impairment, you can hide that if you want to.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a phase like that?
I did, yes, I did. I think it was more social though. I think that was the biggest thing where sometimes people would hold their phone to like show me something and I'd be like, "Oh, that's really cool," and then I just couldn't see it. But I kind of got to a point, especially with the group I was in for quite a while. I think the longest group I've been in out of school where I didn't really explain my visual impairment because I knew if I did, it would be another thing they'd have to do to accommodate me. And I was used to people just treating me differently, and I just assumed that if I told them I actually can't see that and I can't relate to that, or, you know, I can't see you when we're meeting up in a cafe and you're sat at a table in the corner, I can't see you, so I'll just text you to say I'm running late, and then I'll just hide behind the corner and look around and see if I can spot you somewhere. I had to use my phone camera to zoom in on people, survey to see where my friends were because I was so
Yeah,
worried
yeah,
about telling
I
them.
bet your camera roll is crazy.
And I felt like a creepy stalker and I just felt really weird and I was so worried I was going to get kicked out.
I always used to, and I still do it now. I'm a bit better now, but I used to always turn up early to stuff
Yeah,
so that
I did
people
that.
would have to find
Yeah,
me rather than me have to find them.
yeah. I do that. I try and be early for everything because I'm always like, if I get there and it's absolutely packed, how the hell am I going to find my friends? How am I going to do that? So I always try and get to places early, and I always try and find a place where I can be and say, hello, I'm at the stairs, so that I know that if someone's walking right towards me, it's probably my friend, not just some random person, because I've told them I'm meeting at the stairs.
I know you sometimes use a long cane. Do people, because I find this when I use mine, people treat you again differently when you use that? Like
Yeah.
you literally have got no brains in your head whatsoever.
Yes, yes. I try and avoid using my cane as much as I can, and that's just a personal thing, I think. But because I try and, especially in public, when I'm in a new place and there's no one I know, I might use it. But if I'm by myself, I will try my very hardest to try and avoid situations where I have to use my cane. I went on a school trip a few months ago, and my mum was like, "Oh, you should bring your cane because you've never been to this place before." And I was like, "No, no, no, I can't bring my cane because there are people here who will make assumptions on me because they don't know me, and they'll see the cane and then they'll be like, she's different. I'm not going to go and stand with her because then that'll set me apart." So I know that if I wanted people to talk to me and be nice to me, and no, I ended up actually bringing my cane because I got to a point where I was like, well, I think it would be more embarrassing falling down the stairs than
Yeah.
if someone came up to me, well, if no one talked to me the whole time. Like, I think the more embarrassing thing would be being remembered for falling down the stairs, whereas people aren't going to remember that no one
Yeah.
spoke to me because they're too worried about themselves.
Also, sometimes people can't get their head round. Sometimes you use a long cane and sometimes you don't use a long cane. Like they can't get their head round. People think, well, you're either blind and you use a cane or you're not blind. How can one minute you
Yeah.
be okay and the next minute you can't?
I
And
got
it's like,
I got accused of faking visual impairment. But there was a whole group of girls, and they were absolutely set on the fact that I was faking being blind. And I think it was in that class, it was in that same class in GCSE year who I just avoided like literally the plague. They said that I was faking having visual impairment to get extra time in exams. Where did you get that from? Like, I kind of saw it as a weird compliment that I somehow was able to hide the fact that I had visual impairment. It was so odd. I think it was because in one lesson I used my iPad to take a picture of the board, and in another I didn't because I could see the text on the board. And then they had a whole theory. It was really weird.
and it's so weird that people would think that you wanted to get extra time in an exam.
I
Like
know.
if you could see properly, you wouldn't need the extra time. The extra
Exactly.
time is because it takes you longer to read. Like
Then I wouldn't have had to
honestly,
spend 4.5 hours in an exam hall on my birthday. And one of them asked me if I was wearing colour contacts, and I was like, no, you've been in primary school with me. My eyes have been this colour since I was 4.
it's crazy. And what's with the as if you'd put coloured contact lenses in as well. I had all of that when I was at school too. Like, oh, it can't be your real eyes. No one has eyes that colour. And
That
I'm just like,
one.
and where do you go with that? Like,
It's like,
because they're not being nice.
no, it's like I do. I don't want to seem like I'm trying to be different purposefully. Like, obviously, I don't want to stick out because I know that in my experience, if I stick out too much, they will make up horrible things and people will avoid you because they don't want to be seen because of their own insecurities. So I don't really know how to go about like telling people I do actually have vision impairment, I do actually have translucent eyes, because then you just kind of get accused of being attention seeking even when you're not.
No, it's crazy. And I was talking on another episode with my friend Sarah
Mm.
about social media and how people try and replicate albinism.
Yeah.
So they think it's a look. They don't
Mm.
understand that it's actually a medical condition,
Yeah.
and they'll do all this weird stuff. Like
It's
they'll put these contact lenses in that like are literally purple and then have
yeah.
black pupils, and it's like that's not what my eyes look
Yeah.
like. That's not what people with albinism, their eyes look like. And you don't have this weird white hair, but yet
No.
weird kind of roots through it and like black eyelashes, but also don't know. It's so weird, isn't it?
It's really odd to me. Like, I've seen like quite a lot of, things on social media where someone does like a snowy theme makeup and it's white eyelashes and white hair, you know, all of, you know what I mean, snowy theme look, And everyone in the comments is like, this is so gorgeous, this is amazing, this is beautiful, this is artwork. And then I've thought, well, I wish that younger me could have seen people celebrating this, and I wish that these people in the comment section would have had the same response to seeing me who has it naturally as they did to this person who's created it artificially.
Yeah, and people that create it artificially and then because they think it's a real cool look. I'm not saying albinism isn't cool, but what I then don't like about that is that people don't realise that it comes with it's a package as well. It's not just about having hair that people might really like, or like violet coloured eyes that people might like. Lots of us are severely sight impaired, and you have to deal with all the social and emotional stuff that goes along with it too. And just by putting pictures of people with like white eyelashes, that's not what albinism is it? It's way more than that.
Loads of people know albinism is on the surface, white hair, pale skin, pale eyes, but no one really really thinks about the other things which come with it. I think people who I've actually met and who have asked, like upfront asked me, do you have albinism? Is that why your hair is really pale? This, have never really thought, never really thought to ask, has it ever affected your school? Has it ever affected your work? Because all they really see is, she doesn't have any pigment, like that's why she has pale features. No one really associates albinism with low vision. What they see is just what they see.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where the
they
assumptions
see
come
a
from too,
surface.
because they
Yeah, I
only
think so.
see.
Yeah. And it's like what's like kind of represented in the media as well, like people with albinism who are evil or freaks or whatever. It's just the look. It's the look. It's not everything else that goes with it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that helps in people's perceptions of what albinism actually is. And there are a multitude of positives to having albinism. Like I'm not ashamed of having albinism.
Me neither.
However, it does come with negatives too. I always feel that has to be acknowledged, because if you acknowledge just the positives, then you're doing yourself a disservice, aren't you?
Yes, of course there's going to be negatives, but you can grow and learn from the negatives that happen.
How is social media for you in 2024?
I think for me, I don't post on social media, but I used to have a TikTok account where I did makeup art. I did, I did like cosplay stuff where I'd dress up as a character, and then sometimes I'd do like a little transition where it was like me before and then me with the makeup and all that. And most of the time I got really, really positive reactions from people saying, oh, you're really gorgeous without the makeup and all that sort of stuff. Like, it's really interesting about your albinism. And I was very open about, explaining it online, and I gathered quite a following. So that kind of made me think, oh yeah, this is like definitely positive that I keep showing people that this is what I look without makeup and a wig and contacts, where you couldn't even tell that I had albinism at all. But I think looking as someone, especially Instagram, I think Instagram's definitely the worst. Instagram reels, don't open the comments. They're just always horrible, I find. But I think people are a lot braver on social media than they are in real life. So sometimes it's really sad. I've stumbled across videos of people who have albinism, and the comments are all just really sad jokes. Like, it's really sad. It is just really weird that people have the time and the bravery to just type horrible things in the comments because they feel like they're completely invincible behind a keyboard. And so I think social media can definitely be very, very good in spreading awareness. I think was what I was trying to do with my own personal social media account, is spread awareness, but also assure people that I'm also, I'm not just a creator with albinism. I'm also a creator who does amazing makeup, who does amazing lighting, edits my videos, all of that stuff. I do it for myself. But in actually watching people's reactions to others, I think it's really horrible sometimes. And if that's the kind of culture that's going to be created on social media by people just living their lives, I think it can be really negative and have a really negative impact.
So, here's a controversial question. Okay, in the albinism community. So there's a lot of people with albinism, And it's the people who have the type of albinism we have, so the one that the OCA1A that everyone associates with albinism. So a lot of people with our type of albinism dye their hair and fake tan and do the eyebrows and the eyelashes. And I've got absolutely no problem with anybody doing whatever they want to do. And, you know, people who don't have albinism dye their hair and wear fake tan and everything else. So that's absolutely fine. I just worry that there's a proportion of people that do it to hide their identity, to hide who they are, and haven't kind of got to grips with being okay with who they are. So instead of being okay and cool with who they are, they hide their kind of their identity as someone with albinism. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I dye my eyebrows and eyelashes, but I do it because, like, in my head, I know that I like dyeing my eyebrows and eyelashes, and I quite like being able to see my eyebrows. Like, that's
and you can, and you still are very obviously somebody with albinism. Like, it's not like you're not. It's, and I used to do it too, because you're not kind of just a white blob then, are you?
No.
There's definition to your
I
face,
can, like,
but
see my
I
eyebrows.
just am too lazy just to do that.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, well, you can't, exactly.
Yeah, I do it because that's for me, and that's, you know, that's how I feel that I am, like, not like prettiest, but that's what I'm used to seeing now, and that's what I enjoy doing for myself. But I know people, and I have friends who have dyed their hair, who've dyed their eyelashes, who's done fake tan, and, you know, my opinion is that's their choice. But for me, I don't think I'd ever dye my hair to be to a point where you wouldn't know I had albinism, because it's a big part of me. And as I said before, I quite like it. Like, I like being recognized for the good things. I like being always remembered. But I know for some people they're not at a point, or they just won't be at a point where they really see it as a positive. And that's, in my opinion, that's their choice. But it saddens me a little bit to see people who are so gorgeous and were so amazing and literally deserved so much and so much recognition, who've just had purely bad experiences and have led them to a point where they feel like they need to just hide everything. And it's exhausting. It's really exhausting. Like, I tell you, sometimes when my eyebrows get light and my eyelashes get light, I look in the mirror and I go, oh my gosh, I need to dye them again. But what's really, yeah, it's so much effort. And to think that some people feel like their entire emotional foundation relies on the fact that they cover up what they don't want to show, it's really sad. And I have quite a lot of, like, empathy for people who feel like they need to hide their identity. So I dye my eyelashes and eyebrows. For me, like, that's the whole point. I do it because I like dyeing my eyebrows and eyelashes.
Yeah.
But some people will feel as though they've had the experiences which makes them want to completely hide it. And I really don't think people would do that if they didn't have really bad experiences with others being so close-minded towards albinism. And it's just more hurt for others, which is really sad.
It's really weird. Since COVID, people seem to have been tolerant, and I've had quite a few not very nice things happen to me. And, like, people will shout out in the street, "Oh, look, there's an albino!" And whilst
That's
I'm like,
horrid.
okay, yep,
Mind your own
stating the
business.
obvious, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
And when I tell some people, they say to me, why don't you dye your hair so you're less recognizable?
I've had that.
And they're not saying it to be mean to me. They're saying it to help protect me because they care about me. But what people don't understand, and I'm sure you might, is that it is part of my identity, and I'm really quite okay with how I look. It's other people that aren't okay with how I look, and I don't feel like I should change myself for other people. But I worry that if I dyed my hair black, for example, I know this sounds dramatic, Jess, but I would look in the mirror and I wouldn't recognize myself because all my life I've had white hair.
Yeah, I get that. I get that completely. And I wish people would just mind their own business. Like, I wish people would have the audacity, would not have the audacity to just feel as if they needed to say something every single time they saw something slightly out of the norm for them, because it is the norm. Like, this is just how I am. This is normal. But I think I completely agree with the fact that if I did dye my hair, I would lose a part of myself, which I've worked so hard to just keep really close to myself. And it doesn't matter how many times others have been horrible to me because of it. And I know that maybe in a different life, if I hadn't had it, then maybe I would have had a better experience. but maybe I also would have had the same experience for a completely different reason. I completely get the COVID thing as well, actually. I really, really understand that. I think, especially with my age, you know, we missed that whole year of school. We missed the whole year of those petty fights, those getting to know each other, those learning who you don't like and like. But we did get that, so we had to do everything a year behind, and then after COVID everything is muddled up anyway, so things are going to take a longer time to readjust, so people are less tolerant of others. It's tiring and it's annoying, and it's like sometimes I just want to leave the house and put a hood over my head and go and do my shopping and then come home and have no one look at me and just be invisible. But I know that that won't happen, because when you see something different, you're going to look like you're going to have a second look. That's not a bad thing to me anymore, that I know that people only look because they're curious and they're interested, and I don't know what they're thinking. Like, I don't want to know what they're thinking. They could be thinking, I think she's really pretty, she looks really interesting, or they could be thinking, oh, that's so weird, that's so odd, she should dye her hair. And I don't really want to know, and I've gotten to a point where I just ignore people staring. I just get on with my own thing. And it's only at the point where people feel the need to comment or feel the need to say, oh, if I had that, I'd dye my hair. Because someone has said that to me before, and that was horrible. And I was like, you've just looked at me and said, if I looked like you, I would change myself. Like, how do you think that's going to make me feel in the long run?
I had someone say to me, if I looked like you, I wouldn't leave the house.
That's
And
horrid.
it's like you said, what are you supposed to go away and do with that comment? Where do you take that?
Who gave people the kind of right to say that? And I think that brings me back to social media, because people are so much braver on there. And since lockdown, the only thing people really had to converse was social media. So they've gotten used to the fact that they can just say these things to people.
And I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in terms of dyeing hair and not dyeing hair, in that I've worked, and it sounds like you have too, so hard with my mental health and myself about not caring, because like every time I go out people will stare at me. They just do, don't they? It's the reality of having albinism, and I've worked really hard be okay with that. I've worked really hard at thinking, if someone says something mean to me, I've just got to let that go, because who are they? They're nobody. And so I think because I've worked really hard at it, I feel like I would be doing myself a disservice to then hide who I am by making my hair black or brown, because I've worked so hard with what I've got to be okay with it. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I get that completely. It's like, I feel like I have worked so hard. I've been through all of that stuff. I've had literally no escape from it. I've had to just sit through. It was a point of like, I could have just dropped out of school. I could have done my GCSEs at home. I could have gone to a different school. I could have done all of these different things. But instead I stayed, because I knew that the best place for me would be at that school with the teachers who I know would look out for me academically. It would just be insulting to myself and all of the stuff I had to do, all of the progress I'd made in coming to terms and accepting the fact that, people are going to stare, people are going to be horrible. If I just said, okay, no more of this, and then just hid at home forever, or went somewhere completely new in my hair and reinvented myself, which was something I was considering doing after my GCSEs, because I was just so not ready to be back with those people in that environment. But I think, I'm having a much better time now that I've just kind of learned to accept that, I like how I look. It doesn't matter if other people don't like how I look. It doesn't matter if other people think I'm weird because I can't see things. I think the best thing is that I like how I look and I like how I am. And I'm quite happy just getting on with my own thing. If I had gone somewhere else and put myself through the effort of dyeing my hair, getting a tan, and completely reinventing myself, that, I would be absolutely exhausted and I wouldn't be myself anymore. I'd be someone completely different, and then there would be a million more problems with me. So what's the point? Like, being true to myself is so important for me, and I think to discredit everything I've gone through.
So lastly, what advice would you give, say, to a teenager who was starting out in secondary school?
I'd say the biggest thing is to focus on yourself And I think if I could repeat my own secondary school experience, I would just keep saying in my head, focus on yourself, keep your eyes on the end goal. And the end goal for me is to get out of there with GCSEs, to get out of there with good grades, to have a good time. If having a good time for one person is having a big friendship group, okay. If having a good time for someone else is getting out of there with good grades, I'd say just focusing on yourself and focusing on what you need and literally ignoring everyone else, keeping an open mind and staying true to yourself and 100% just doing things for yourself. And that sounds quite selfish, but I don't think I would have survived if I hadn't taught myself that I'm only here for me. And if I have a friend group, so be it. If I don't have a friend group, so be it. I'm here to learn. I'm here to get my grades, and I'm here to be the best person that I can be.
Thank you so much for listening to that episode of Albinism Life with Jess and I. I thought it was a really fascinating conversation, and I feel really humbled that people want to share their stories with me. So thank you so much, Jess. If you want to get in touch with me, please email info@albinism.org.uk, and I look forward to you joining me for the next episode of Albinism Life podcast. Take care. Bye.